For an instant, Nancy panicked. Would the girls be able to steer clear of the menacing rocks? A collision seemed unavoidable. "We'll be killed," gasped Helen. "Row to the left, Laura," Nancy commanded. "It's our only chance." With a burst of energy, the rowers turned the boat and deftly avoided the jagged boulder. An oncoming wave pushed them further out of danger. "There's a cove ahead," Laura shouted above the wind. "We'll try to make it." In another 5 minutes they reached the cove. Here the water was comparatively quiet. "Thank goodness," Helen murmured. "Oh, you girls are wonderful." As Nancy's oar struck the sand, she dropped it and quickly stepped out into the water up to her knees. Laura followed, and the two girls put the boat up onto the beach. Then they helped Helen Conning step onto firm sand. "How do your arm feel now?" Nancy asked her. "Better," Helen replied, "but I'm freezing." Her teeth were chattering. Nancy herself was cold. She squinted through the darkness and rain, trying to see where they were. It seemed to be a desolate spot. "Where are we?" she asked Laura. "Is there some place nearby where we can sit out the storm and get warm?" "The only place I know," Laura replied, "is a bungalow I passed a while ago as I was walking along the beach. It's to our right, secluded among the trees." "Sounds fine," Nancy said. "Let's hurry." The three bed-raddled girls stumbled along the beach. Water oozed from Laura's sandals. Nancy and Helen had kicked theirs off in the lake and now slid in their soggy socks. Presently the girls reached a small, concealed building, a 1.5-storied weather-beaten bungalow which stood a short distance from the water's edge. The upper level nestled into the steep wooded hillside. Since there was no light inside, Nancy assumed no one was there. She knocked. No one answered. Nancy tried to open the door. It was locked. "Looks as if we're out of luck," said Helen. But Nancy was not easily discouraged, and she knew it was an imperative for the girls to get warm. Her father, a well-known lawyer, had trained her to be self-reliant. He frequently handled mystery cases, and Nancy had often helped him in unearthing valuable clues. In addition, Nancy had solved some mystery cases on her own, one involving an old clock and another a haunted house. Then Nancy had aided its owners to discover a hidden staircase which led to the capture of the mansion's ghosts. "I'm sure that the owner of this bungalow will forgive us for going in," Nancy said. There was a small window to the right of the door. She tried it and found to her relief that it was unlocked. "That's a lucky break," said Helen as Nancy opened the window. Fortunately, it was low enough for the ground for the girls to hoist themselves through easily. "Phew!" Laura exclaimed as the wind almost blew them inside. She helped Nancy close the window. It was pitch dark inside the building. Nancy groped around for a light switch, finally found one and flicked it on. A small bulb in the ceiling disclosed nothing except two canoes and a wooden bench which stood against one wall. "Maybe it's only a boathouse," said Helen, flopping wearily onto the bench. The girls noticed a narrow flight of stairs leading to the second floor. "I wonder," Nancy mused, "if we might find something up there to wrap around us, or maybe even some towels to dry ourselves off with. Let's see." Laura followed Nancy to the rear of the building, seeing the light switch for the upper story. Nancy turned it and the two girls climbed the steps. To their surprise, the second floor of the bungalow was furnished with two cots and blankets, a table and chairs, tiny refrigerator, a sink, and two-burner electric stove. "We're in luck," Nancy exclaimed happily. "Come on up, Helen," she said. Laura spotted an open closet in a corner of the room. It was well stocked with food. She held up a can of prepared cocoa. "Under the circumstances," she said, "I doubt that the owner of this place would object if we made something warm to drink." Helen and Nancy agreed. Within a short time, the three girls had taken off their wet clothing and wrapped in blankets. Laura had turned on one burner of the stove and made hot chocolate. This is good," Nancy said contentedly. Both she and Helen again thanked Laura profusely for coming to their rescue, and said they had been trying to get back to the Pinecrest Mountain. "Are you staying there?" Laura questioned. "For a week," Helen replied. "My Aunt June is coming tomorrow. She was supposed to ride up with us Thursday from River Heights, where we live, but was detained. She's trying to help design my dress for my marriage to Jim Archer. He's in Europe now on business for an oil company. When he returns to the States, we'll be married." Nancy Drew asked Laura if she too was a summer visitor at the resort. When her question met with silence, Nancy was surprised to see tears gathering in Laura's eyes. "I'm sorry, Laura," Nancy said instantly. "You've been through a terrible ordeal. You should be resting instead of talking." "Of course," Helen agreed. Laura blinked her eyes, then said soberly, "You don't understand. You see, my mother passed away a month ago, and—" She could not continue. Nancy impulsively put an arm around Laura's shoulder. I do understand," she said, and told of her losing her mother at the age of 3. Nancy lives with her father, a lawyer, and Hannah Gruen, their housekeeper. "I'm an orphan," Laura stated. "My father was in a boat accident nearly 6 years ago." She explained that Mr. Pendleton's sailboat had capsized during a storm. He had been alone and no one had been near enough to save him. "That's why," Laura added, "I knew I had to save whoever was crying for help on the lake today. I love to walk in the storm." Nancy and Helen felt their hearts go out to the brave, parentless girl. Not only was Laura brave, but also she showed great strength of character. "With whom are you staying now?" Nancy asked Laura. The girl looked troubled. "I'm alone at the moment. I checked in the Montevado Hotel just this morning, but my guardian Jacob Ebon and his wife Marian are to arrive sometime this evening. They are taking me to their summer homes at Melrose Lake. I believe it's near here." "Yes, it is," Nancy said. "Do you know the Aborns?" Helen asked. Laura said that she did not remember the couple. Her mother had frequently spoken of them, however. "Mr. Aborn is distantly related to my mother, and it was her request that he become my legal guardian in case of her death." Laura gave a slight sob, then went on. "But no answer came from our lawyer's letter to Mr. Aborn, who was traveling." "How strange," Nancy remarked. "Finally, I wrote to Mr. and Mrs. Aborn myself at the Melrose Lake address," Laura said. "The truth was I needed some money as a down payment on tuition at the boarding school I attended." "And they replied?" Nancy asked. "Yes, Mr. Aborn told me to come here, and he and his wife would meet me. Helen interrupted. Then everything's settled, so you should be happy. The girl shook her head. I feel I'm not wanted. The letter wasn't cordial. Oh dear, what shall I do? Nancy gave Laura a hug. You should be at school, and during vacations you can visit friends. And you have a new friend named Nancy Drew. Oh, Nancy, you're sweet. Laura smiled for the first time, but in a moment her mood became sad again. Living that way isn't like having your own home. Mother and I had such wonderful times together. She brushed away a few tears. Nancy wanted to learn more about, but saw by her waterproof watch that it was 6 o'clock. Laura would have to hurry off to meet her guardian. The sky was getting lighter and the rain had almost stopped. We better leave, she suggested to Helen and Laura. The girls washed the cups and saucepan and dressed. They put the blankets where they had found them before leaving the bungalow. Nancy wrote a note of thanks to the owner, signing it "Three Grateful Girls." As they were parting, Laura said, "If my guardians don't arrive, I'll call you and arrange a date for tomorrow." "Please do," Nancy and Ellen urged, and waved goodbye. When they reached the Pinecrest Motel, the two girls went at once to talk to Mr. Franklin, the manager. They told him about the sunken motorboat, expressing extreme regret, and assured him their parents would pay for the craft. "Don't worry about that," the manager said. "We have insurance which takes care of such accidents. I'm glad you girls are all right." At that moment of shot, thin woman swaggered into the office. Her pine dress was mud splattered, and she had lost the heel of one shoe. Her wet bleached hair clung to her head in an unbecoming fashion. Ignoring Nancy and Helen, who were still conversing with Mr. Franklin, the woman said bluntly, "Is there anyone here who can change a tire for me? I just had a flat half a mile away." "I'm afraid not," Mr. Franklin apologized. "I'm busy in the office and most of the help are off this evening." "That's great," the woman said angrily. "What am I supposed to do? Walk to the Monterado Hotel? I'm late already." Although Nancy had thought the strange motorist was being extremely rude, she nevertheless suggested that the woman telephone a nearby service station. "I'm sure they'll send someone out to help you." This idea was received with a snort as sparks of annoyance flashed in the woman's pale blue eyes. "I'll think about that," she said sarcastically, and turning, limped towards the telephone booth. She banged the door shut behind her. The three spectators looked after her with disgust, and Helen said, "Some people don't deserve a helping hand." The irate stranger was still in the booth when Nancy and Helen went off to their room on the ground floor. After a bath and change of clothes, the girls felt better. A tasty dinner in the restaurant restored their energy, and they played shuffleboard under the floodlights. The next morning, as the two friends dressed, Helen asked, "Do you think Laura Pendleton would call us?" Helen was putting on Bermuda shorts and a candy-striped blouse. "I imagine so," said Nancy, "unless her guardian and his wife took her to Melrose Lake last night." "How far is that from here?" Helen inquired. Nancy consulted a road map. "About 25 miles," she replied. Then, as she was putting on loafers, someone knocked on the door. Nancy went to see who it was. Laura Pendleton stood in the doorway. She looked very pretty in a becoming pink cotton dress, but the doll's eyes were shadowed and she seemed highly distressed. "Oh, Nancy, Helen," Laura exclaimed. "I just had to come to see you as soon as I could." "We're glad you did," Nancy said. "Come in." Before she could continue, Laura flung herself on Helen's bed and started to sob. "What's wrong, Laura?" Nancy asked in concern, going over to her. Slowly the doll sat up and wiped away her tears with a handkerchief. She apologized for her behavior, then said, "I don't think I'm going to be happy living with the Auburns, at least not with Mrs. Auburn." Troubled, Nancy asked Laura whether the guardian and his wife had arrived the evening before. "Only Mrs. Auburn," Laura replied. "She came to my room about an hour after I left you girls. She was wet and in a very nasty mood. Apparently she had a flat tire on the road and was delayed in getting help from some gasoline station." Nancy and Helen exchanged significant glances. Mrs. Auburn sounded like the woman they had met in Franklin's office. "What does your guardian's wife look like, Laura?" Helen asked with interest. "She's blonde, small and thin, and I dare she was terribly upset about the trouble she'd had. I understood this and tried to make her comfortable in the extra bedroom, but—" Laura went on to say that Mrs. Auburn, instead of calming down, had become even more unpleasant, blaming the girl for making it necessary for her to drive the Twin Lakes in the bad storm. She said that Mary, my mother, had spoiled me, and that I was going to have to tow the mark in her home. "Oh, what will I do?" Laura asked. Nancy did not know, but said Mrs. Auburn's behavior was inexcusable. When she asked whether Laura's mother had known the guardian's wife well, instead of replying to the question, Laura said absently, "Mrs. Auburn called my mother Mary." "But, Nancy, mother's name was Marie."